Hello, good morning, and welcome everybody to a Monday episode of My EdTech Live. Monday, that's right, it is a Monday episode of My EdTech Live. I am officially on break, so we'll be back to work till January 4th. So I'm just really excited that I get to do an awesome show on a Monday morning with an amazing guest. And for all of you watching and listening, as always, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate you guys joining us this Monday or when you rewatch the episodes. Again, as always, thank you for making the first season amazing with our first 100 episodes. And now this is officially the first episode of season 2. So here's to another wonderful 100 episodes. And today, season 2 starts off with a bang. That's right. Today we have an amazing guest. I am really excited because I got to connect with Dr. Luke Hobson over LinkedIn, and we just through just a thread of conversations and so on, I somehow managed to get a very unique and special copy of his book. And just reading about this and more about the instructional design world has been amazing. And just to be able to connect with him, he is just a wonderful person, a wealth of information, and his willingness to share is something that is amazing. So, in case you are interested in the world of instructional design or maybe learning a little bit about it, and my educator friends, you may be doing a little bit more instructional design than you think, but you just haven't seen it in that way. Well, Dr. Hobson today is going to talk to us about that. And so I'm excited. So, Dr. Luke, how are you this morning?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me. And also, I feel super honored to be the season two's first guest. This is super cool. He didn't tell me that. You're
Hey,
saving it for the show.
I save it for the show. I save the surprise, but as always, it's an honor and a pleasure for you to be here today. So, Dr. Luke, just in case for any of our audience members that are watching, listening, or catching this on the replay who may not be familiar with your work, can you tell us a little, give us a little brief introduction, give us your context in the education space, and if you can add one interesting fact that people may not know about you?
Oh, you threw me a curveball in there. You would. You would. So, for the folks who don't know me, my name is Dr. Luke Hobson. As Fonz just said, I am a senior instructional designer and program manager at MIT. I also produce a lot of instructional design content on the internet from a YouTube, a blog, a podcast, and everything is just my name. So creative in that entire process that I just figured I would just call it my own title. So I was like, yeah, there you go. That works. People can find me that way through Google. That's the easiest way. And I also have a book, as you mentioned, What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer, where I just took everything I learned about over the years and I put it into one file. And that way the people could, yes, there you go. And there's the book. And Fonz has a special unique copy where I ordered 5 before anybody else's to make sure that it actually looked okay. And that's what one of those copies are, which you're holding in your hand, which is super cool. And a unique fun fact about me is that something people might not know, I am obsessed with fantasy football. I play in 6 leagues, and I was absolutely screaming yesterday at all of the games as I'm going into the playoffs in a bunch of them. And I unfortunately lost in a few of them, but I love football. As you can see, the little football thing behind me. That way. There you go.
There you go. Well, thank you so much. And as always, I'm very thankful here for this awesome copy. And we'll get to talking about this book because this book definitely has a lot of great knowledge gems and knowledge nuggets there that really allowed me to open up my eyes to my current practice and just to what else there is out there. So thank you so much for that. But before we do, I always like to kind of get the origin story of my guests. And, now that you're working as a senior instructional designer and program manager for MIT, I was like, to me, that's an honor. I'm like, I'm talking to somebody from MIT here. But let me ask you something. Is this something that you knew you wanted to do right off the bat? Or is this something that you kind of fell into and just like kind of like myself with education, just fell in love with? So tell us a little bit about your journey into, and how you got where you got today.
So it's really weird because it's kind of a yes and kind of a no. A no in a sense that I hated education my entire life. I actually failed out of high school and I had to go back to summer school 3 times to get enough credit to finally pass. And the reason for why I failed was that I never saw the connection of what I was learning about in high school to the real world. So I was constantly talking to my teachers, is basically saying, like, how is this going to help me get a job? What am I going to do with this knowledge on medieval literature, which you make me take for the 4th year in a row? And it was always like, oh, you're going to learn about it when you're older. And guess what? I never did. So eventually I ended up failing out completely. So to answer that question, like, was education in the cards for me? Like, no, it shouldn't have been. My parents are still astonished at what I do for a living, by the way. They're like, don't know how you got here. And I was like, me either. It's a really weird journey. But after all of those things, I really wanted to be a musician. That's what I wanted to do. As you can see, the guitar's behind me. I wanted to go to Berklee College of Music. That was really the goal. And when I transferred to a different high school, they offered music courses. So finally, someone could tell me about how what I was learning about in the classroom was going to connect into the real world. And I saw the light. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I understand. So after that, I applied to Berklee. I didn't get in because my grades, shockingly, were really bad. So I was like, okay, what else am I going to do? So I tried to stick with the artistic road and I went back to school, to college for graphic design. I wanted to make posters and things like that for bands. I was hoping to still be in the musical world. And from graphic design, I eventually went to marketing. From marketing, eventually I found a job as an academic advisor in the online learning space for Southern New Hampshire University. And finally, I kind of opened up my eyes to see, like, oh, okay, like this is blossoming, this is growing because SNHU started to boom with thousands and thousands of enrollments. So I was the person who was on the phone calling students, walking them through their courses, supporting them, coaching them, helping them with anything. And during that time, I was networking with everybody at that school because I just wanted to know more about what is everybody doing. And then finally, I met a group of people called instructional designers. And I was like, what do you do? And they're like, well, we design the online courses you're walking students through. I was like, oh my gosh, like that's a job? Like I can do that for a living. And then as soon as I heard about that, to answer your question, that is when I was determined, like, okay, I want that job. I'm going to make this happen no matter what it is. It still wasn't in the cards for me. I was denied from everything until finally someone gave me a chance. And that's when things really started to grow. So then eventually, through all those opportunities, and I worked at Northeastern University, and then finally took what I know and brought it over to MIT, and I'm still here today.
Wow, that is wonderful. But it's you said something that really resonates with me. And of course, we hear it all the time. It's like, well, how is this going to help me in the real world and making those connections? And I mean, you yourself said, I mean, it's important that as educators, and it doesn't matter, if you're K-12 or even in higher ed, it's important that we make those connections. But at the same time, like you said, it's like, hey, your passion was in music. You went there, you tried that out, and now that wasn't in the cards. And then all of a sudden now you are in the world of instructional design, and mind you, you're doing some phenomenal work. But for me, it kind of reminds me of two previous guests that I had, which are Josh Buckley, Mike Earnshaw. Punk rock kids, scenesters, designing, taking their passion for music and punk rock and so on, and bringing it into education. And it kind of seems like you kind of have that vibe too, where even as maybe the title instructional designer may not sound very like, ooh, it sounds very exciting, but you're bringing that passion that you have for music and so on, and you're really just making it fun and engaging, which is what we should be doing.
I'm
So that's
trying.
wonderful to
I'm
hear.
I'm trying. I mean, like, that is essentially like the equivalency of like what we're doing right now of like being on stage, public speaking on stage virtually, but whatever. But like that to me has kind of shifted my mentality around that because of how I got that kind of thrill and that passion as far as for like entertaining folks and being on a stage. Like that connection was there. And now I'm just doing it a different way where now I'm talking with a microphone and on YouTube and podcasts and stuff. But it's the same exact thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you and I could both relate to that. I love that. And that's again, just taking our passion for presenting, for sharing, and doing all of that, and then just bringing it to everybody and bringing it to the masses in any which way that we can. So that's the wonderful part about it. So now let's talk a little bit more now as you finally decided or actually saw what instructional designers are. And you mentioned something, you tried, you knocked on many doors, no, until one person gave you an opportunity. But let's go back a little bit when you decided to pursue instructional design for yourself, and maybe you can relate this to a little bit about what you were writing on your book. What were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome? So as you started knocking on doors, what were you seeing? Because we might have some viewers right now or people that are going to catch this on the replay that might be interested in going into instructional design. What are some things to look out for as you started opening up these doors?
So for me, my issue was that everything that I'd done before that, I was very much in a type of like of a student support, customer support role. So I kept on thinking about my interactions with students because I was a lab assistant as well. I didn't mention that. Eventually, I taught courses afterwards too. So it was like the mindset was always just like, well, how do I help the kids in the classroom? How do I help the adults in the classroom? But then for instructional design, and this is the feedback I got after my like ninth interview of failing. Finally, someone was this like, hey, you're framing it wrong because you are just assuming that you're going to be in front of a classroom, that you're kind of more of a teacher. He's like, but you're not. Like, you're behind the scenes. The course is already done. Like, by the time the students are enrolled and they're taking it, you aren't doing anything on the fly. It's already out there. So you need to shift about how you're going to support them from the back end of being able to predict potentially what's going to happen. How are you going to be able to collect feedback from folks and make it better the next time around? And that started to click. I was like, oh, hypothetically speaking, if I wasn't talking to them and they were going through this module and now somebody says like, wow, the content isn't clicking, well, then that's on me. I need to do a better job of being able to make sure everything that I am doing is going to be aligning across the board. So once I received that information, that funny enough, you then interviewed the next people I was going to be talking about. But then I was networking with others and I was just like, so give me some resources. Like, what should I be reading here? What is going to help me out just to understand a different type of mindset? And I was recommended to read Dr. Katie Novak's book, UDL in the Cloud, which is all about removing barriers. I was like, aha, okay, now this makes more sense. If I'm thinking about universal design for learning and I'm trying to design for all and make sure that everyone's enjoying the same type of experience, now this is starting to click. And that's eventually when the barriers started to go away.
Oh man, that is great. And I love what you said there. Oftentimes, and myself included, I mean, going through the master's program and just finishing that off in 2019, um, taking some classes on instructional design. And, I'm like, oh, wow, like this is something that's very different, but similar to what I did in the classroom. Cause saying, yeah, it's kind of like lesson planning and so on. But I love that you said, it's not necessarily that you're going to be in the front of the class teaching it. But one thing, again, with Katie Novak, also as guest number 99 here on our episode, talking about how to universally design this for that learning experience. And I love that you said that because it's something that is very important, not only for the higher education space, but obviously in the K through 12 space to make sure, that everybody has access to any learning and that learning experience overall. So that's something that is wonderful and networking. So I love that you mentioned that because that's definitely something that is very powerful. As you know, I always have my PLF, my personal learning family, and that's something that's my network of connections of people that I go to and, get to learn from them and ask them questions. And I know that that's something that's definitely very, very important. So,
Of course. I was trying to network with anyone in instructional design, by the way. Anyone who would give me the time of day, I would take them out for coffee. I would do walks around the buildings with them for like breaks, during lunch hour, just to being like, hey, let's go and like, take a break and chat. And like, oh, hey, while we're here, can I talk to you more about instructional design? Like any opportunity I had to be able to do something with these people just to learn from them because they all had different types of perspectives. They all had their own types of unique visions of what the online learning experience should look like. And all their programs, of course, are very different. So they were all designing in different ways. And that so much helped me out. And now, whenever someone is thinking about like nowadays for potentially 2022 with LinkedIn and Facebook and everything, I was like, folks, you have this entire network out there. Like they exist. They're there. You can go and message them right now to learn more about that and just ask, can we have a virtual coffee chat? Like that is a real thing. You can do that. So networking is huge, no matter the industry or what it is that you do, but being able to make those connections will just pay off in the long run, like by far.
for sure, for sure. So let's talk about instructional design now, because I mean, as you know, there's different types of instructional design in different areas of expertise and so on and so forth. So when you first got that opportunity, tell us about that first experience and how it was possibly working with that SME and now you're having to create. So tell us some of those things as well, because again, I just want to know what that experience would be like, what to look out for, and for our audience members to know as well what to expect or possibly see.
Sure. So I'm not sure if what I experienced is common, but I will tell you my first instructional design project because it was a doozy, and I feel like I kind of got baptized by fire in a way, but it really did help me out because I grew so fast in such a short period of time. But when I was an ID, I worked at Northeastern University, my first ever like instructional design title. I did a kind of a similar odd role at a different point in time, but this is the actual first instructional design title. And I was tasked with being able to create an accelerated degree program between Northeastern and General Electric, because what they wanted to be able to do was to essentially train the up and coming employees. Everyone was currently retiring and taking all of this knowledge with them. So we need to be able to transfer this knowledge over into these other employees and to really help them out. So I was assigned to go and start this entire process with analysis. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And they're like, well, you need to go to the GE plants. And I'm like, okay. So I started to go to the plants and I started to interview the people who would potentially be the students in the program. And I was just trying to learn more about them. I had no idea their personas, their backgrounds, what it is that they even do for work. I was just like, I need to know everything. So I just started to interview people to learn more. We started to do focus groups and presentations and workshops of just like really trying to understand these people because they were a unique audience. They already were working full time. They're all adults, have always other different types of commitments. So we were trying to be able to create this. And of course, make it accelerated. So we don't want them to go back to school for 4 years. We want to be able to take different elements of like experiential learning and challenge based learning and put it into a program that's going to be helping them out at this immense rate. And that was my first ever project, which was crazy, but I learned so much in such a short period of time that once this was done, I'm like, okay, I can handle anything. If I could do that, and I'm up for whatever challenge life has in store for me.
Man, and and it's so interesting, like you said, it's you have to know, and this like your customer, you have to know your students, you have to know who it is that you're targeting, that audience, and that's definitely something that is very important. And I think for myself, coming in from a business field and coming into education, that's something that it's kind of been ingrained in me from my bachelor's in business and seeing that it's all about customer service, knowing who your customer is, so you can go ahead and adjust your sales pitch to every customer because not everybody's going to buy the same way. So you have to create this product that is going to be great for everybody. Like you said, that acceleration piece, that's something that's wonderful. And that's something that we are currently seeing a lot. I know that when I first started my grad program, it was a traditional 15-week, the very first semester I did. But then after that, it moved to a 7-week module. And I finished within a year and a half just because of those extra 15 weeks. But so is this something now that you're seeing higher ed do to just either bring in more people, more students to go in through those programs and just come out and you're ready to go?
It's definitely trying to meet a need. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the courses that I have been teaching are 8 weeks for undergrad or they're 11 weeks for grad, depending upon what program it is. And that's definitely more of the norm. And I wouldn't be shocked at all to see if that changes to something else completely different. I mean, obviously, I know you had some guests before too who come on the show and talked about like competency based education, which is entirely another path that definitely aligns with that one as far as for being able to really assess the person's knowledge and the skill set instead of just trying to measure their time in the seat. It's a different way of completely thinking altogether. But what is to stop us from being able to do something that's like even shorter? Like there's no like there is no like a definitive like definition of like it has to be 8 weeks. This is like, well, like could it be 4? Could it be 2? Like what is to stop that? Because as we're currently seeing from different types of people, they are being able to go out and pursue what it is that they want to do on their own time, their own pace, and they find the model that works for them. For some people, it's going to be going through something like a Skillshare, where they're like, oh, I just want to go and like actually teach myself this new skill. I don't need to go into a classroom, I don't need to do anything. And this is what's going to work for me. I can do it within 6 months. Then you have other people who are like, no, I want to be a part of a cohort. I would rather be a part of a more intense program for like 2 to 4 weeks with this cohort based model and go through people together at the same time. And that way we can share knowledge and talk about what we're currently learning about. Because I know that's going to suit me. It's going to help me. It's going to allow me to actually stick with it all the way until the end. I know that, like, even if I'm burning out, I can rely on others. And that's what's really going to help me to be able to go and finally cross that finish line. So, the idea as far as for customizing everything within a course is, absolutely relevant to everything. And if I was to kind of put on like my tinfoil hat and kind of like talk about like the future, of like where do I think this is gonna currently be going? What I am going to think about, and I still haven't figured out all the details yet, like how this is going to work. But when you play a game, you can actually start like a video game where you can go and you can choose your difficulty. And most people start off at the normal difficulty. And then as you're playing through, and let's say, but your character ends up dying, well, then the game suggests that they're like, hey, we noticed that you're really struggling. We're going to actually go from normal and we're going to switch it over into easy and see what you think about that. So essentially, what that is doing is adaptive learning because it learned from the user that they're not doing so hot. So they're going to bring it down to a different level to help them enjoy the process. Why can't we do that in the classroom? Like we can. And especially at the way the technology is going, it would not shock me to see if somebody going in and signing up for an 8-week course. And then as they're working their way through week one, we're like, we realize this is kind of a bit difficult. Why don't we change how long this is for you? Here's just the introduction section, and the introduction section is only 4 weeks. If you want to go through the entire expansion, then yes, let's do 8 weeks. So I can kind of see that changing the different things in the future.
Yeah, no, and I can totally agree with you on that. As myself, as somebody who's always looking out for certifications or learning and so on, and things like LinkedIn Learning. Like, I mean, I get to take things at my own pace, and then you've got like, okay, let me go with the beginner course to see if this is something that I really like. Now let's go ahead and like really dive in, and let's see if this is something that is something really for me. But I love that you said that, just that adaptability, because not every learner is the same. But to have that option to say, hey, I want to dive in, and then all of a sudden it's like, I think I dove in a little too quick, too fast. So let me just kind of slow it back down a bit. And then you've got those that they're just like fish in water that can kind of take off and go with it. And I'll tell you what, one of my things from transitioning from the grad program now to the doctoral program and going from a 7 week to now a traditional 15 week, I'm like, oh my goodness, this takes so long. I'm like, I wish that they would just speed it up too as well. It's like, couldn't it be like 7 weeks, some of the stuff and, combine it and put it together? I mean, that's just me being me. But, it's
Yeah, but
something
it's
that it's important, because some people can definitely just take off and roll with it.
yeah, but like, but if you also like agree, so like hypothetically speaking, you agreed. Well, let's say that there was like a form for you to sign where you're saying like, hey, actually, I want to be able to go and take this in accelerated rate. Can you combine every other module? Because I promise I have the time. Like I will knock it out for if you're telling me that it's going to be, an additional 20 hours a week, I will commit to that right here and now as long as everyone else can, whether that's going to be the content's already available or if the instructor is willing to do that. Like there's a number of different things, but like there should never just be a definitive like no we absolutely can't do that. It's like why not? Flexibility is a way that everything is going for online higher education, and those are the people who are currently winning. Is that they're like, hey, we found a different way to be more flexible, come on in, all are welcomed. Those are the people who have been surviving during this crazy time, and we've seen this unfortunately where so many different types of colleges are closing their doors because they couldn't adapt, they couldn't be flexible, and they would do this type of like emergency remote learning, which isn't the real way to actually design online learning experiences and courses. And people ended up leaving because they're like, yeah, this is kind of awful. I'm going to transfer to somewhere else because now I have all of these options. I don't have to just go to the school 15 minutes down the road from me. So that needs to be in a conversation as far as you're being flexible with whatever level, grad, doctorate, undergrad, doesn't matter. It should be a conversation.
Yes, it should. I agree with you. And I know, I mean, at least the professors that I had for the master's program also like they're on top of that. And at least what some of the things that they're seeing is they're offering stacked credentials too, like additional certificates because they're seeing like right now it's micro credentials are out there. People can just go and get them done for free or pay just very minimal just to get that certification. And they're bypassing like, well, I don't need to go through this 7 week program when, like you said, if I can finish this in 3 weeks and get my certification, might as well just do that. So I know that there's some universities that are adding that additional value and saying, hey, you finish the grad program and with one extra class, you get a technology leadership certificate and then you get an e-learning certificate tied to that. And so those are some of the things that we're seeing too for that competition. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's fantastic. And then I would say take that one step further. So you have that cert. So essentially you have like the cert within the program or within the degree, whatever, but then also combine that with other different types of industry certificates that people are going for. So if you currently have like a type of an IT degree program, let's say, so you have the IT degree itself, then you have the other mini cert within there, but then you're going to be going through courses that stack that with Google certifications. Like why not? Like stack it with Google now because but that's what they're gonna do once they're done and graduated. Because they're like, oh, hey, I actually should really learn about this. Or they're currently doing it on the side, either way. So if you can include other different types of industry standard certifications into the classroom, it's all the better. Because once again, going back to tying it into like, how is this going to help me in the real world? Where you can say, like, hey, we're confident that if you take our program, you're going to be learning about the industry standards of like of Google, Apple, and Tesla and Twitter, and like whatever different types of things you can find out there that other industries and companies are looking at and saying, like, hey, like you have the degree, you have work experience, and also have these other different types of certs on your profile, like fantastic. So yeah, makes plenty of sense.
Yeah, sure does. All right. Well, it's we kind of went off on a tangent there, but I was
Sure
like,
did.
but it's all good. This is what it's all about. Just we're live and we're learning here, and it's great PD for everybody. So going back to the instructional design aspect of it, what would be the best advice for somebody that is out there that is looking to see, okay, where is it that I may fit in? What kind of instructional designer do I want to be when I grow up? It's kind of like one of your chapter 3 in your book. So give us a story about how, well, obviously you gave us a little background of how you learned how, the kind of instructional designer you wanted to be, but some advice for those that are up and coming and are interested in this field.
Yes. So if you just do a quick Google search, you're going to realize that maybe it's a little bit too confusing, even just by Google standards of hearing different types of perspectives out there. But when folks think about instructional design, that could mean something very different within a higher ed perspective, a corporate perspective, or if you want to do things for a government agency or a nonprofit institution, or you want to be your own designer, you want to do freelance. They're all so different. There are similarities. Like, don't get me wrong. We all focus on designing the online learning experience and working with SMEs. Like, we all do that. That is a thing. But there is a focus in different types of areas because for some, you're really going to be hammering home more about learning sciences because that's the nature of the game. For others, it might be focusing more on a training where you want to be able to go and do something at a rapid rate. So you're going to be using like e-learning authoring tools and working with somebody to go and create a very fast type of a training just to make sure that everyone is on the same page at the organization. So those are different types of ways as far as for what I want to be able to like really give advice on. It's just like I want you to find the meaning in your work. So that's why that chapter is titled the way that it is. Like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because like if you want to work in higher education and you're finding joy and value in higher ed and academia and that's what you love, well then consider that path. If you don't, if you want to work more at a rapid rate, you want to become the next person who's going to be leading the entire industry for training and helping new leaders emerge within working over for Google or Wayfair or like for whatever, then like fantastic, but then go that way. And then the easy way to start to like think about that, obviously networking, we talked about that. Definitely network with other different people in the field, but also even looking at a job posting. If you look at a job posting and you start to break down exactly what the entire job is all about, what the qualifications are, the requirements, what this person is really going to be doing, it's really different looking at an instructional design job from say Apple and then looking at a job from Harvard. Like they're just simply different. And if you were to try to do both at the same time, it could be really challenging because some might have a different path going one way and others might care about a path going a different way. So that's an easy way to start to think about like what do I really want to actually do here within this instructional design land?
Excellent. It's a great advice on that because, for many people that may be out there looking at, I mean, just even if you go to LinkedIn and you just do a job search for instructional design, wow, like it just opens up. And I mean, there are different companies there, different fields. You might be surprised. You're thinking to yourself, like, wow, like they need an instructional designer for like Slack. You need an instructional designer for other education, non-education companies, dental companies, and so on. And you think dental company, they need like instructional design. And a lot of times we don't make those connections that, yes, you do need somebody to create and working with those subject matter experts to go ahead and create that content for those people for onboarding, for training, and so on. That's something that's very important. So I want to ask you, how can you tie this? Like, for example, if there's somebody in K-12 that might be interested in maybe pursuing a different career or even, going into higher ed, what are some of the things that maybe that they are may currently be doing that tie into the ID job? Because like I said, when I read your book, I was thinking to myself, wow, I never really saw myself as an instructional designer because it's like that my title is instructional technologist. However, I do create and I do, create modules and of course learning for teachers and so on. But as maybe a teacher interested in instructional design, what are some of the things that the commonalities between those?
Oh yeah, and there's definitely plenty. I mean, it makes a lot of sense for folks who are teaching K through 12. If you want to come over into this field, it makes plenty of sense. There's definitely a lot of things that you need to be able just to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row on because it's not like the flip of a switch, which unfortunately on LinkedIn, it kind of seems to be like there's this kind of a debate of like, can you just switch from like one job to another in an instant? And it's just like, no, they're different. There are similarities, like, but they're still different jobs. Like, just like how you don't want me to go and teach fourth graders tomorrow. Like, no one wants that. It's not going to go well. So the thing is that when you are thinking about preparing, so let's just say first and foremost that like you started to think more about instructional design. You found some job postings where you're like, oh, that seems really interesting. Yeah, I want to be the instructional designer for like Spotify. Like that's what I would love to do. I love music, and it's like perfect. Let's do that. Look at the job posting, figure out what this person is doing, then think more about too as far as for your daily job, what are you currently doing? Because it's going to take a bit of a mental exercise from you to be able to translate it from K through 12 speak into instructional design speak. And there's almost this entire essence of like, if I'm interviewing you, I want to be able to talk shop with you. Like, I want to nerd out with you. I am looking for common phrases and words that if you don't say it, it's going to make me have to really think to say, like, does this person know what they're talking about, or are they just trying to like kind of wing it? But when you start to think more about like, oh, okay, this is talking about, designing curricula and resources and really expanding the learning experience. Well, then tell me about a time that you actually really did that, where you were able to see like the light bulb moment that would go off above your students' heads, where you did something that was a brand new type of a project or some type of a assessment that like they never thought about before, where it was group work or based on a scenario or for like, whatever it is. But think about those moments and then start to write them down, because I guarantee for an interview, whenever it does actually come up, I'm going to ask you about those questions of not only, working with challenging SMEs and everything from that human skills aspect about the job, but also I'm going to be saying like, hey, tell me about what you've actually done. How have you designed these products? How did you evaluate them? How did you know that it really was working? What did you measure for effectiveness? Those different types of elements that as you start to do this homework, you can see where the lines are going to be connecting. And then once you've done all of those things, now, luckily, we're in 2022, there are so many resources out there on just how to transition from K through 12 into instructional design. I see like a new YouTube video a week talking about that. So now you don't have to do as much guesswork as, unfortunately, the folks back in like 2019, 2020 who are like, what am I doing? Where am I going? At least there's a lot more support and content out there to try to help you actually make that shift.
Oh, most definitely, and definitely your website and your podcast are definitely very
Oh,
helpful
I have plenty.
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got plenty of material, that's for sure. So that's wonderful. So let's talk a little bit more now also about working with SMEs, because I mean, as a, and again, I'm just coming from that K-12 perspective and going into that higher ed, very similar. It's like we have to do some work here. We have our, let's say, assistant soup, we have our soup, or if you're in the classroom, you have your principal. Well, in higher ed or where you're doing instructional design, now you have your subject matter expert, which would be in this case the professor that you're working along with. Is that correct?
It could be a professor, or it could be an adjunct instructor. It could be an industry voice coming in from the outside. Because what I love to do, if possible, I want more than one, because I want to have the professor, but then I want to have somebody come in from the industry so that way you're getting both the academic voice and the industry voice to once again tie in like, how is this going to help me?
Excellent. And see, and that's what I wanted to talk about, the subject matter experts. In your experience with working with subject matter experts, what have been, number one, maybe if you can tell us your number one learning experience, I guess maybe trial by fire, your very first time, maybe a thing maybe a mistake, a failure that was a stepping stone now to your success. If you don't mind sharing that with us, and then
Oh,
of
yeah.
course the different types of SMEs that you work with, and maybe have you ever? And I know I threw this question at you on LinkedIn, but have you ever had to tell an SME to say, "Hey, man, like maybe we got to change the curriculum here a bit," and how did they take that?
Oh,
So
yeah.
let's start off with that first trial by fire, your first time working with an SME that maybe didn't go too well.
Oh, of course, of course. And I have plenty of mistakes, by the way. Like I have made plenty, which is luckily for me, I've learned from those so that way I can keep on getting better every time. But I have absolutely made plenty of doozies. So by all means, if you are currently working with a subject matter expert and things aren't going well, and perhaps that you may have made a blunder or done something, like, it's all good. Things happen. We're humans. We're definitely not perfect. As far as working with subject matter experts, my big light bulb moment that went off is that I kept on winging it with working with subject matter experts. I always just assumed that people knew what it was that instructional designers did, because I'm like, because I figured that out when I worked at that institution, and all I wanted to be was an instructional designer. So naturally, my world became instructional design because I was so immersed in it. And I was like, oh, well, it's higher education. Other people must also do this and know what it is that we do and everything. And my God, it cannot be further from the truth. Now, people know what it is that we do. But before, my gosh, it was absolutely crazy just to kind of go in and thinking about that mistake of like, I would just go and literally walk into a room and say, like, oh, I'm Luke, I'm an instructional designer. And the professor is just like, all right, what's that? And I'm like, oh, I see. So then it became me like fumbling my words and trying to explain about how I would work with them, but they're the experts, but I'm an expert in some areas. And I'm like, I was like, how do I actually do this? And what I started to realize is that I needed to be able to give myself kind of like a leg up. I was actually like underselling instructional design. So what I started to think more about was that, like, hey, you are obviously the subject matter expert, you're the content expert, you've made this type of a course. But if you're going to make it into an online version, we got to do something different. And that's where I'm coming in, because now I am going to be like your online learning expert. That's why I'm here to help you out, because we can't do things the same way. We know that we can't just take one model and flip it into another model doing the exact same stuff. It does not work. It's not going to resonate. So that kind of became my selling point of like, I'm here to be able to do all of these different things. And that research element is what really started to drive that for me. So instead of winging it, I started to do my homework. I would research about the professor, who they are, what articles have they written, have they been in the news, what is their passion, what are their courses about, what's their syllabus. Like, I would just go through everything, learn as much as I can about them and the subject. And then that way, when we had our first like introduction call, I could actually go in and give them some suggestions of like, hey, I just read your latest article. I saw what you were talking about for this piece. I have this awesome idea. We can do this inside of this simulation. We can bring about this assessment. The discussion could look like this. And all of a sudden, it's like I could see the wheels were turning where they're like, oh, I know why this kid's here. Now this makes sense. Like before, I'm like, oh, I'm here to help. And now it's like, hey, I already have ideas. Like, I would love to really try to be able and work with you to see like if these make sense. This is our kind of our starting point. So that research piece, and then being able to go and try to craft with your creativity what you can bring to the table, that is really going to be able to just like wow a subject matter expert. And it's absolutely worked for me for years.
Excellent. Well, that's great to know, because again, like you said, it's about knowing who you're going to be working with. And I love this comment I'm going to put here. Holly 433 says clear, concise communication and authentic relationships are key. So Holly, thank you so much for joining us here with this comment. Thank you, Mel, Joanne, or Joan, and Amanda, who are joining us here. Sharmila also as well. Thank you so much for joining us in the chat and really being engaged here with the comments. So yeah, most definitely that's something that is very important, just to make sure that you know who it is that you're working with and building those relationships. And that's one of the things, I mean, even K through 12, and overall, I'm always just relationships, relationships, relationships. It's all about that. And even like my friend Ryan Scott always says, it's always connections before content. And I think that that has really helpful. And I can see that tie in into the instructional design world too, as well. I mean, from higher ed, it's amazing the connections between K-12 and higher ed. Some of the things, obviously, the language changes a bit, but a lot of the principles are still very, very much alike as far as the instructional part. And I love that, being making that accessible to everybody. So, all right. So as we're kind of winding down, Dr. Luke here, what are some of the things for right now, people that may be looking into this job role or going to school, thinking like, yes, this is what I want to do, instructional design? What would be maybe your top 3 tips for them as they prepare, so that way that the interview process comes, that they're ready to go? What would be your top 3 suggestions for them on how to get ready for the transition into instructional design?
Oh my gosh, only pick three. Okay.
Okay, I can give you 5.
No, it's fine. It's just like, all right, what time is it? Yeah, there's no way we can go into every single thing. So, what I would say, I guess I can kind of put them all in together. Obviously, the book has like everything I know in there. So please read the book. That will help to answer this question more than I can in the next couple minutes. But the way that you think about how you're going to be approaching these interviews has to change. So, what I keep on seeing from people currently is that they're like, I'm going to be an instructional designer, and they have a resume or some kind of portfolio. They have something where like, I'm going to submit it and I'm just going to kind of wing it and kind of hope from there. And for some of those people, you will get interviews from what you have. From others, it's just going to be a constant stream of getting denied, 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 denied. And that eats away at you because I've been through that. It sucks. It's awful just to get rejection letter after rejection letter and feel ghosted and you don't hear from anybody and you're like, you're like, what is going on? What is wrong? And what I would try to be able to tell you right now is to think about everything is that the mindset around an interview has to change. And this is how I actually took this approach and finally got my real instructional design job after being denied a billion times. The first is that I stopped thinking about it in the same type of way as far as for with everything else. So what I mean by that is that going into the interview, I prepared like my life depended on this. I would go and look up questions that people would write down on Glassdoor to be able to see what company, because a lot of people post the interview questions on Glassdoor or LinkedIn, and you can find them on Reddit. There's plenty of different places to find the interview questions ahead of time. You can search common instructional design interview questions and then go and practice answering them right now. So, first and foremost, write down a script. I want you to physically write down how you would answer the question, then practice speaking it out loud, and then record yourself. Now, why all of those steps matter is that the way that I'm talking to you literally right now is that I have practiced public speaking. I know what to do. I know how to be able to sell and to convince a type of an idea to make one type of idea transfer over into another. And you have to do that during the interview because you're selling yourself. You're selling the idea. So when you are looking at this recording afterwards, see exactly what you do. Are you making eye contact? Are you talking in a way that is passionate? Are you emphasizing the right points? Did you forget about something? Or perhaps are you doing something like you're saying the words, like, and all those different things of that nature? Or are you talking with your hands 24/7 like this? Those really do matter. That's all feedback. So the next time you're like, oh, I'm not getting feedback, I wonder what's happening. You're having immediate feedback as far as for what you currently are doing within the interview. And then you can get better every single time. And then, of course, prepare ahead of time to bring things too. One of the biggest selling points that I heard from the interviewers after I got my first job was that I practiced drawing on a chalkboard or a whiteboard. So I would constantly make diagrams that I memorized where I was like, if somebody asked me a question about just like what is learning or what does the 21st century student need to actually be able to have, I remembered and I started to memorize a couple of different models that I was using and what my research was showing me at my time for the dissertation. And that's what I brought to the table. And someone, of course, asked me about like, hey, what do you think we're going to be doing for going forwards with our types of online students? Like, how would you design an online program if we gave it to you today? And then sure enough, there was a whiteboard in the room. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. So I went to the whiteboard and I started like doodling and I started to show and connect all the lines and like talked about that. And after that, I saw one of the people in the interview and he was like, has his hands like were kind of crossed and he just kind of like sits back and he was just like, okay. Like I could tell that what I just did, it won him over. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm moving on to the next round of this interview process. I don't care how long it's going to take me, but that person's on my side. And if you can do that and then see that now in a type of a Zoom environment, and you can start to see that people are nodding along and they're writing notes down and they're actually engaging and paying attention with you, you know you're on track. So being able to prepare for instructional design interviews is so key. And if you do this instead of just applying for 24/7 for every single job that you see, have a clear purpose of why you're applying to this place. What are you going to do? And then what are your steps afterwards to be able to think about how did this go, reflect upon it, what can I do better the next time, and then go and apply that. There you go. That's what I would do. Five.
Perfect.
That's a
That,
few.
that was one there. But I mean, like you said, everything's perfectly right here, nicely packaged in this book. And you really hit on a lot of those points, which kind of it's a nice segue in talking about now. Let's talk about this book. I mean,
Sure.
first of all, your inspiration for this book. I mean, I know you have your podcast, you have your website. This is something that you are clearly passionate about. But what was that moment that you said, you know what, let me just go ahead and just write this book? So tell us a little bit about that and who your intended audience is for this book.
Sure. I mean, the audience is definitely all the people who are probably listening to this right now. K through 12 teachers, educators, soon to be instructional designers, entry level instructional designers who just want to learn more to kind of dive on into the instructional design world. I wrote the book because I kept on answering the same questions about career guidance, which is something where I was just like, "Oh, this is kind of interesting." I was like, I don't see any other books out there that are tackling the same thing. I'm seeing everything as far as for with learning theories and models and pedagogical terms and like all the different types of the nitty gritty in the weeds. But there was no one out there who was writing a book of like, tell me about your 5-year plan of what are you going to do. Like there was no one saying about how do you work with difficult subject matter experts and like in the variety that I was saying. And I was just like, this is kind of interesting. So after answering like the 27,000th question, that was kind of like the same thing of where I'm constantly directing people to the blog and the podcast and YouTube channel and courses and everything. So I was like, you know what? It would be so much easier if I could just put this all into one thing for you. And then that way you can just take all the years from my brain, please take all my knowledge and then just go and run with it. Do everything that you can with it. And from reading a couple of different types of professional development books, like the way that I wrote the book is that there's obviously a bit of piece of information, but then of course you should be, if you are actually following what I want you to do, you should be answering the questions in the back of every single chapter. There are questions based around practice questions, applications, and reflection questions because I want you to read one chapter and then go and do the thing. I don't want you to just go and say like, "Oh, I read your entire book within a day." Because while I am flattered, I'm like, that's impressive. Like, thank you so much for reading the entire book. I'm also like, but I know you didn't do what I wanted you to do. I know you're not getting it out of this type of value that if somebody did actually stopped, pause, worked on themselves and their career, it would help them. So it's like, I appreciate it, but at the same time, it is to help you. It is not just a read in a one kind of sitting thing. It is to make you go take action, get better, and then go and proceed to the next chapter. That is the point of the book.
And I loved it so much. And the reason I found out about this too is because we have a mutual connection, a mutual friend, Veronica. And, I connected with you. I was like, hey, I want to learn more about this. And then, of course, I got the book. And I remember it's like I finished that first chapter. It's like my routine is I get up 4:30 a.m. And then by 5 o'clock, I'm in my office. I'm reading a chapter. I'm doing something. Just that's my learning time, that I set aside. And then I remember that day, I finished that first chapter and then I remember I got on LinkedIn. I was like, "Hey, here's my reply, Dr. Luke." But it's such a great book that you read it. It's simple to understand, and I love the way that you share your experiences to help us see things in a different perspective. And really, kind of, this is the book that helped me make that connection to, like, wow, And I even wrote you like this long, long message saying, for the first time, like I actually see myself as an instructional designer because not because the title instructional technologist, it's different, but now I'm like, wow, like I'm doing a lot of this stuff here, but I love those reflection questions that you have at the end of every chapter that really allow you to say, okay, like, wow, like I never saw things that way and allow you to reflect on your practice. And I think that's something that is so important nowadays because we can easily just consume, like myself, like when I put those little 1 minute sound bites there, people consume that and then that's it. That's all they take, but they don't go back, revisit the episode, get everything in context and so on. And because we live in a time where it's like immediacy, it's like, hey, I got everything on here in the palm of my hand through my phone and so on. But when you really do take that time to reflect and these exercises that you give us, I mean, it really causes you to pause and really think and even sometimes reevaluate. And you have like this moment where you're like, oh my goodness, like I never thought about this. So I
Right.
really that's one of the things I love about this book.
Oh, thank you. And that's how I design my courses, by the way. Like, I have taken plenty of courses, as I know you have too, where it's just like, I swear I'm just reading and reading and reading and then watching videos. And then somewhere in there is an activity. And I'm like, okay, I don't remember anything, but I just watched from like video one and now I'm on video 10. I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like, where am I going back to? And that's how I design my courses, where there's so much activity involved that I aim 75% to 80% of the time, you're doing something. So, yes, there is some form of reading in a video, but then there should be discussions and applications and activities and assessments. There should be all these different things too, just to make you like stop and pause and think. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, yeah, how does that apply to what I just learned about, or my life, or to where I want to go in the future, or whatever it is? Those moments need to be in there because you need the information to stick. If you're just consuming content 24/7, which we all are naturally because of social media and YouTube and you name it, everything else. I listen to so many podcasts and I don't remember things like at all. All of a sudden, it was just like the information's gone. I just listened to it yesterday. What happened? It was like, oh yeah, it was like the mind numbing thing of just listening to it casually doing the dishes. And yeah, I don't remember it anymore. Well, because if I was to actually take it seriously and to go and take action or do something afterwards, and it's just like, oh, okay. Like if you were trying to be able to learn, listening for entertainment and enjoyment is one thing. But when you're trying to be able to really like develop and focus and work on yourself, you got to do something. You need to take action. So that's why all of those questions are there.
Perfect. Wonderful. So if you get a chance, guys, go look it up. It's on Amazon and it is a wonderful book. What I wish I knew before becoming an instructional designer. Like I said, I'm so happy I got one of these, not for retail copies. I feel very special, but I think to top it all up, this one was the best, one of the best personalized, um, just books that I've had. I just love it. Just says, Alfonso, keep up the nerdy podcast. Love it.
There you go, man. There you go.
So simple. I love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Luke. And before we wrap up, these are the three questions that I always love to wind down as we're finishing the show. But, ahead of time, I do want to tell you thank you so much for spending this hour here with me. And of course, with our audience members that are currently watching, those that will be listening to the show afterwards. I really appreciate all your experience and knowledge that you shared. And you really do reflect that passion that you have for instructional design and your genuine effort to help others that are interested in this field. And just you are so authentic. So thank you so much for just being a wonderful guest. And of course, guest number one for season two. That's something that's great too, as well. So thank you. All right. So here are my last three questions that I want to ask you. Number one question is currently in the state of education, and again, maybe what you see in education overall, or this could be within your field. What would you say is your edu kryptonite?
Ooh, what is my actual weakness? I am currently a sucker for GatherTown. Have you seen GatherTown yet?
Yeah.
I am so into GatherTown. For the folks at home who haven't seen that, think about it like if somebody took an old school Super Nintendo game, like with The Legend of Zelda or Mario, and they mashed it with Zoom and it became its own platform. That's what this thing is. And I am just a sucker for it because I can go and create my customized avatar. I can make my own virtual space, do what I want. And it's just so cool. So every time that I have a chance to either go and join students on GatherTown, or if somebody's like talking about it on LinkedIn, like I have to comment on it. So it's just like, yes, like I love GatherTown. So by far, that is my weakness at the moment, is that I've become so obsessed with that thing for sure.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Next question is if you can turn one of your hobbies into your profession, what would it be and why?
Oh boy. If I was to go back, I would probably go back. So before all this nerdiness with the instructional design land, I had a health and fitness podcast that was talking
Mhm.
about health and fitness from a learning science perspective. And that was cool. It helped me to get my podcast chops. I would probably go back and try to revise that. I want to go back and bring that back from the dead and make it better. I've competed in a couple of natural bodybuilding shows. Like health and fitness is like a big part of like what it is that I do and what I really do enjoy. So if I can go and take that and help people actually go and get fit and lose weight and build muscle in a healthy and sustainable way, which is like the biggest thing, is that no one's able to do it from a sustainable and healthy fashion, which was like the whole aim of the show. I would go back and try to actually see what I could do again. Now that I'm wiser and older, what would
There
I
you
change to make it better?
There you go. That's wonderful. That's great, and that's another fact, that interesting fact that maybe some of us did not know about you. So that's great.
I
That's
don't think I've
awesome.
ever said that on a podcast yet. So you were the first. Yep.
Yes.
There
All right.
you go.
And the last question for you, Dr. Luke, is, and this is my favorite: if this was your show and I was your guest, what would be one question you'd like to ask me?
How have you been able to do 100 episodes and not get burned out? Flat
Well,
out, like, it's the drive is crazy, man. It's so impressive.
This is my passion. It's a simple answer. This is my passion. This is what excites me. This is what gets me going. This is what I love to do. And it's just learning from subject matter experts like yourself and the previous 100 guests that I've had on, and just making those connections and allowing others to kind of venture off and see things in a different perspective too as well. And to me, that is really what drives me, and the fact that I just am continuously learning. That's why, I'll reach out to guests and say, hey, this is something that I'm interested about right now. Like, hey, do you want to come on the show? Because I want to pick your brain and I want to learn more about this. So really, it just comes down to that passion and that learning spirit that I have, that I just want to know all things and get them shared with everybody. So that's the secret right there.
Follow-up question. What's coming up after this?
The next 99 episodes for season 2 for sure. But as far as podcasting, or
It just meant from like what happened to me, and this is why now I have like all this stuff, is that like I started first with just being like, I want to write a blog. But then eventually the blog was this like, well, I could help more people if I go and I make a podcast. And I like, being in front of a microphone. So this kind of makes sense. And then it went from there to being like, wow, well, if I really incorporated some visuals, I bet I can make better videos. And then YouTube became a thing. So it's like it constantly evolved. Every time I had one idea, all of a sudden this other creeping idea was like, you could do something else. And I'm like, I could do something else. And then now we've been talking about a book, which I definitely did not plan on in any way, shape, or form. So I'm just kind of curious, like, do you envision the podcast becoming eventually into another, I don't know what idea you might have.
No, well, right now, currently, I'm focusing on my studies, my doctoral studies. So I'll be finishing off with that soon. But it's just continue the podcast. I have been blogging. I haven't been blogging as much just because I've been focusing on the podcast. But I will be taking a little break after Wednesday. Short break, because we do need to get some rest and so on. But, I can, right now, currently, I'm thinking about doing some online courses, for podcasting as well. And there is a book, currently in the works as well.
Right.
So
Okay.
that'll
There
be,
you go.
yeah, so that'll be coming. It'll be an exciting 2022. So I'm really excited about that because, again, like you said, one thing can lead to another and lead to another. But for the most part, right now, the podcasting is my passion. And like I said in my show, what it's all about is connecting educators and creators one show at a time. And to me, that brings me the greatest joy when I'm able to learn and our audience members are able to learn, and they can take that knowledge and use it to sprinkle onto what they already do great and serve it up to their learning community. So that's really what it's all about.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Luke. And you will be able to find how to connect with Dr. Luke on the podcast notes as well. But he does have a website, drlukehobson.com, or just go to Google and just type in Dr. Luke Hobson. You will find everything that you need there. His website is amazing. He's got a lot of information. The blogs are great. Check out the podcast episodes because they are just very useful, very easy to follow, but you will learn a lot. And hopefully after today's episode, you start making those connections. If you are interested in becoming an instructional designer, or you currently are, hopefully you'll tip some gems today as to how to work with SMEs and through the experience of Dr. Luke Hobson. And also, please don't forget to really check out his book. Check it out on Amazon. Get it. There's a digital version also as well. But again, as always, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Luke, and to all our audience members watching us. Thank you so much for your support. As always, we will be back. Guess what? Tomorrow, we will be back. We will have a show tomorrow with Stephen Grubbs. We will be talking about Victory XR and the amazing work that they're doing with augmented reality. So make sure that you join us tomorrow, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we will see you guys tomorrow. But before that, guys, as I always say, please don't forget to stay techie, my friends.
You